Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series where we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazzet, and today we'll be looking at a build featuring the Scout of Dominarian Worldsoul, Gwenna, Eyes of Gaea. But before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. And if you're feeling particularly generous, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description to keep me caffeinated as I work on more of these builds. Also, be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see who won last week's poll and what commanders you'll be voting for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Gwenna, Eyes of Gaea is a 2/3 that costs 2 and a green and has the following abilities. We can tap her to generate 2 mana of any color, which we may only spend on creature spells or the activated abilities of creatures. And whenever we cast a creature spell of 5 power or greater, Gwenna gains a +1/+1 counter and untaps herself. Breaking down her core stats, Gwenna is sporting a relatively low CMC, a slightly below average stat block for her cost, and a pair of abilities that provide decent creature-focused ramp with a particular focus on high-power creatures to not only provide even more ramp, but also grow Gwenna into a sizable threat herself. Taking a closer look at her first ability, it serves as a fairly decent source of ramp despite it being limited to only creatures and their abilities. After all, green arguably has the most impressive menagerie of creatures, both from a stats perspective as well as abilities, making the 2 free mana a turn she provides for us quite useful to get them into play that much faster. And to make it even better, it synergizes very well with her second ability, which allows us to untap Gwenna and load her up with +1/+1 counters as we use that mana to cast high power creatures. Again, green is no stranger to big overstated and undercosted creatures, allowing us to easily untap Gwenna to take advantage of the ramp she provides potentially multiple times per turn to get these creatures on board and turn her into a massive threat as we do so. So, as we can see, Gwenna is clearly a commander that cares about casting big high-power creatures, allowing us to cast even more creatures as we do so while turning her into a high-power creature herself, which is why we'll be taking this build in a big green Stompy direction, aiming to take maximum advantage of the ramp Gwenna provides to bring down massive creatures and run over our opponents with them. This, of course, means we'll be running a huge selection of overstated creatures, ranging from mid-range entrants with top-end stat blocks to top-ends with enormous stat blocks that can easily bring down our opponents in only a few swings. And to support our massive creatures, we'll of course be running plenty of additional ramp sources outside of Gwenna to ensure they can come out as quickly as possible, plenty of creature and high-power creature support to generate additional value as we play them, and ways to empower them and grant them trample to ensure they can hit even harder as they crash through our opponent's defenses. So let's go back yet again to the events of the Brothers' War, but this time see it through the eyes of Gwenna, one of the chosen of Gaea, the world soul of Dominaria. She saw firsthand the devastation that this war caused to the plane, its once lush and bountiful resources being torn from it to build and fuel war machines, once verdant forest being reduced to cinders with each battle, and countless of innocents suffering and dying as they were caught in the crossfire. So she decided to fight, bringing to bear the full might of Gaea upon those who wounded her and her people, and even gave her life after the Silex blast devastated the plane to ensure that the survivors would endure, putting the needs of the plane and its people before her own until the very end. So now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Beginning in the CMC1 slot, we start off with a trio of mana dorks in the form of Elvish Mystic, Finhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves, all of which are 1/1s we can tap for a green, each serving as a cheap source of ramp that helps us get to Gwenna quickly, then supplementing her ramp in turn to help us get to our bigger creatures and spells that much faster. Similarly, our last entrant, Arbor Elf, is in the same vein, also being a 1/1, but this time letting us tap it to untap target forest, again providing us even more cheap ramp that works well with our mono green build. It's then on to the CMC2 slot, with its first half bringing us Fauna Shaman, a 2/2 that lets us pay a green, tap it and discard a creature to have us search our deck for any creature card and put it into our hand, making it a superb tutor to fetch up our primary playmakers, whether they be utility creatures, additional beatsticks, or otherwise. The latter half of this slot then adds Mere Superior to our ranks, a 5/6 that can only be cast using mana produced by creatures, essentially making it a free 5/6 body alongside our commander, as she'll be untapping herself after we cast it, making it a great way to proc our creature payoffs and build up our board state for essentially no mana. Moving on to the CMC3 slot, we'll open with a pair of triple green elves in the form of Llanowar Tribe and Steel Leaf Champion. Llanowar Tribe is a 3/3 we can tap for triple green, effectively making it 3 1-drop mana dorks stapled together and providing us with even more green mana to cast our bigger creatures even faster. Steel Leaf Champion is a 5/4 that can't be blocked by creatures of 2 power or less, giving us another overstated creature for the cost that, when combined with this build's trample granting sources and pump effects, makes it difficult for our opponents to effectively chump block it as it swings in. Then as our last entrant in this slot, we have the legend Rhonas the Indomitable, a 5/5 with Death Touch and indestructible that can't attack or block unless we control another creature with 4+ power, and lets us pay 2 and a green to give another target creature +2/+0 and trample until end of turn. Our large number of high power creatures allowing him to come online very quickly, while his keywords make him a powerful defensive creature that can safely block and kill almost anything. And that's on top of his activated ability allowing us to use the excess mana from our commander and our mana dorks to pump into our creatures to make them even more powerful if we have no further creatures to cast. Proceeding to the CMC4 slot, we begin by adding some overstated legends to our arsenal, those being Sorok the Huntcaller, Pelucranos World Eater, and Nylea Keen-Eyed. Sorok is a 5/4 that, at the beginning of combat on our turn, if we control 8+ power worth of creatures, grants target creature we control haste until end of turn, making him a rare way in our colors to get our creatures to swing in as soon as they come down, while also being a decent-sized beatstick himself for the cost. Pelucranos is a 5/5 with Monstrosity X for double X and a green that, when it becomes monstrous, deals X damage divided among any number of target creatures our opponents control, who also deal their damage back to Pelucranos equal to their power, making it an ideal candidate for what we're looking for in our creatures by being overstated for its cost, while also having the ability to make itself even bigger and serving as removal as a bonus. Nylea is a 5/6 enchantment creature with indestructible that isn't a creature unless our devotion to green is 5+, reduces the cost of all our creature spells by 1, and lets us pay 2 and a green to reveal a top card of our deck, putting it into our hand if it's a creature or giving us the option to send it to our graveyard if it isn't, sharing some similarities with Rhonas before her as she comes online very quickly thanks to us being in a mono green build and having access to lots of multi-pip green creatures, with her possessing a solid and resilient stat block along with cost reduction that works very well with Gwenna to get even more mileage out of her self-untapping effect, in addition to serving as a source of card advantage to pump our excess mana into to dig for even more creatures to summon. We then have a pair of more stat-appropriate legends joining us with Goreclaw, Terror of Kalsizma, and Yeva, Nature's Herald. Goreclaw is a 4/3 that reduces the cost of all our creature spells with 4+ power by 2, and, whenever it attacks, grants all 4+ power creatures we control +1/+1 in trample until end of turn, serving as yet another source of creature cost reduction to synergize with Gwenna as we cast our high power creatures, as well as a decent payoff in the form of a free mini overrun every single turn to help pile on the damage. Yeva is a 4/4 with Flash that lets us cast our green creatures as though they had Flash, her ability to let us play the backbone of our deck at Flash speed, giving us a substantial amount of flexibility, ranging from granting our creatures pseudo-haste by letting us play them just before our turn, keeping them safe from wipes and removal until we have the opportunity to safely cast them, and even allowing us to use their ETB effects on our opponent's turns to serve as instant speed disruption. And then wrapping up this slot, we have the non-legendary entrants Beast Whisperer, Karametra's Acolyte, and Territorial Allosaurus. Beast Whisperer is a 2/3 that, whenever we cast a creature spell, draws us a card, providing us with a steady stream of card advantage as we cast our high volume of creatures to help keep our hands nice and full. Karametra's Acolyte is a 1/4 that we can tap to generate green mana equal to our devotion to green, serving as yet another ramp source that this time can generate an absolutely insane amount of mana for us thanks to us being in a mono-colored build, allowing us to get to our higher CMC creatures well ahead of curve. Territorial Allosaurus is a 5/5 with kicker for 2 and a green that, if kicked, fights another creature when it ETBs, giving us our last overstated body in this slot that has the option to be used as spot removal if needed. It's then on to the CMC5 slot, in which we'll continue on our bigger creature game plan with our next entries, Battle Mammoth, Challenger Troll, and Defiler of Vigor. Battle Mammoth is a 6/5 trampler with Fertel for 2 and double green that, whenever a permanent we control becomes a target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, lets us draw a card. Its ward-like draw effect at best de-incentivizing our opponents from targeting our things, while at worst letting us replace the card we lost, all while possessing a decent stat block to swing in with. Challenger Troll is another 6/5 that this time prevents creatures we control with 4+ power from being blocked by more than one creature. Again, serving as another sizable body that this time directly supports our high power creatures by preventing them from being multi-blocked, which works very well alongside Trample to run over lone blockers and get in for substantial damage. Defiler of Vigor is a 6/6 trampler that, as an additional cost to cast green spells, lets us pay 2 life to reduce that spell's cost by 1 green mana, and, whenever we cast a green permanent spell, puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, synergizing perfectly with our game plan by not only providing cost reduction with its Phyrexian mana-like effect, but also making our already big creatures, including itself, into permanently bigger and bigger creatures as we continue to cast our spells. Gigantosaurus then gets added in as our biggest stat block so far, being a vanilla 10/10 that doesn't so much pass the vanilla test as it does shatter it, and working very well with our various sources of trample granting to ensure its enormous bulk can crash through blockers and straight into our opponent's life totals. Then closing out this slot, we have its last 2 entrants, Garruk's Pack Leader and Arashi the Sky Asunder. Garruk's Pack Leader is a 4/4 that, whenever a creature of 3+ power ETBs under our control, lets us draw a card, serving the same purpose as Beast Whisperer in keeping our hand full as we cast our creature spells, with the added benefit of being bulkier so it can get in for damage itself. Arashi is a 5/5 that lets us pay X a green and tap her to deal X damage to target creature with flying, in addition to letting us channel her by paying X double green and discarding her to deal X damage to each creature with flying. Her anti-flyer removal and wipe helping us shore up this deck's weakness against them, while her stat block is decent enough to use as another beater if there are no flyers to contend with. It's the CMC 6 slot, then up next, starting with its biggest entrants, Aggressive Mammoth, Terra Stomper, and Gargos Vicious Watcher. Aggressive Mammoth is an 8/8 trampler that grants all other creatures we control trample. Its huge bulk and built-in trample allowing it to crack in for significant damage, while its AoE trample granting effect lets all our other creatures do the same for even more damage. Terra Stomper is another 8/8 trampler, this time that can't be countered. Again, its big bulk and trample allowing us to continue to pile on the damage, while its protection against counterspells being situationally useful against more counter-focused builds. Gargos is an 8/7 with Vigilance that reduces the cost of all our Hydra spells by 4, and whenever a creature we control becomes the target of a spell, it fights up to 1 target creature we don't control, providing us with yet another big beatstick that this time serves as a deterrent to prevent our opponents from targeting our creatures with removal, unless of course they're willing to lose their creatures as well. Kogla the Titanape then also gets slotted in as another overstated entrant, being a 7/6 that, when it ETBs, fights up to 1 target creature we don't control, when it attacks, destroys target artifact or enchantment the defending player controls, and lets us pay 1 a green and return a human we control back to its owner's hand to give Kogla indestructible until end of turn, bringing a lot to the table with its excellent front row and back row removal as it comes down and swings in, all on another massive body. We then round out this lot with Soul of the Harvest, Paleoth, and Thunderfoot Baloth. Soul of the Harvest is a 6/6 trampler that, whenever a non-token creature ETBs under our control, lets us draw a card, giving us yet another creature-focused source of card advantage, this time on a large body to crack in with. Paleoth is a 5/5 that, whenever a creature with 5+ power ETBs under our control, lets us return target creature from our graveyard back to our hand, serving as a source of repeatable creature recursion as we cast our other high power creatures to ensure any we lose don't stay gone for long. Thunderfoot Baloth is another 5/5, this time with Trample, that, so long as we control our commander, gains +2/+2 and grants all other creatures we control +2/+2 and a Trample, usually making it a 7/7 Trampler that provides a solid AoE anthem as well as Trample to supercharge our already impressive creature base. The CMC 7 slot then continues on the high power creature trend with its first entrants, Dawnglade Regent, Muldgraf Monstrosity, and Garruk's Horde. Dawnglade Regent is an 8/8 that makes us the Monarch when it ETBs, and, so long as we're the Monarch, grants all permanents we control hexproof. Its huge stat block also bringing with it some solid card advantage by granting us the crown when it comes down, on top of protecting our entire board from targeting so long as we're able to keep that crown, which should be a simple matter considering how much green beef stands between our opponents and our life totals. Muldgraf Monstrosity is another 8/8, this time with Trample, that, when it dies, exiles itself to return 2 random creatures from our graveyard back into play, leaving our opponents with a difficult choice of either leaving it alive to continue crashing into their life totals, or remove it and have it reanimate 2 potentially worse threats from our bin for them to contend with instead, either of which we're fine with. Garruk's Horde is a 7/7 trampler that has us play with the top card of our deck revealed and lets us cast the top card of our deck if it's a creature, making it a big trampling beatstick whose creature sight allows us to play a good chunk of our deck off the top, which in turn makes it a very solid addition to our game plan. The slightly smaller Thorn Mammoth then closes out our CMC7 slot, being a 6/6 that, whenever it or another creature ETBs under our control, has Thorn Mammoth fight up to one target creature we don't control. Its smaller size being made up for by its repeatable source of creature removal that we can use multiple times per turn and only gets better as our other sources make it bigger. Now nearing the final stretch of our creature entries, the CMC 8 slot brings us another trio of heavy-hitting beatsticks with Archetype of Endurance, End-Raze Forerunners, and Terastodon. Archetype of Endurance is a 6/5 that gives all creatures we control hexproof, along with removing hexproof from our opponent's creatures and preventing them from having it or gaining it. Not being quite as big as some of our other entries, but making up for it by providing our creatures with targeted removal protection for extra resiliency, while stripping that same protection away from our opponent's creatures to leave them vulnerable to our removal effects. End-Raze Forerunners is a 7/7 trampler with Vigilance and Haste that, when it ETBs, grants all other creatures we control +2/+2 Vigilance and Trample until end of turn, enabling potent alpha strikes as it comes down thanks to its Overrun style effect while leaving our creatures up to intercept any crackbacks, all while being a big body that can crack in the turn it comes down as well. Terastodon is a 9/9 that, when it ETBs, lets us destroy up to 3 non-creature permanents, giving their controllers 3/3s to replace them, more or less making it 3 beasts within in a trench coat on top of a massive 9/9 body, its inability to hit creatures not bothering us too much since our creatures will generally outclass our opponents. Almost at the end now, the CMC 9 slot brings us its pair of double-digit entrants, those being Titanoth Rex and the Tarask. Titanoth Rex is an 11/11 trampler with cycling for 1 and a green that, if cycled, puts a trample counter on target creature we control, providing us with yet another massive creature if hard cast in the later game, or, if drawn early, lets us cycle it away for the draw while providing another one of our creature's permanent trample as a bonus. The Tarask is a 10/10 that has haste and ward 10 if we cast it, and, whenever it attacks, fights target creature the defending player controls. Its ward 10 generally making it untargetable, while its haste allows us to swing in with it as soon as it comes down and take advantage of its on-attack removal. Both of these generally being online since we'll be hard casting it 9 times out of 10, and its biggest weakness of lacking trample being covered by our other sources that can easily grant it to it. The CMC 10 slot then brings us our penultimate and biggest creature, Impervious Great Worm, a 16/16 with Convoke and Indestructible, making it an absolutely gigantic body with built-in resilience that our utility creatures can help pay for thanks to Convoke, and, like the previous entry, its lack of trample being covered by other sources in the deck to ensure it can slam its 16 power into our opponent's life totals reliably. And finally, skipping to the CMC 12 slot and our last creature entry, we have Ghalta Primal Hunger, a 12/12 trampler that costs X less to cast, where X is the total power of creatures we control. Its massive stat block often hitting the board for as little as 2 mana thanks to our high volume of high power creatures, allowing it to begin wreaking havoc on our opponent's life totals much sooner than its CMC would otherwise suggest. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instance. Skipping straight to the CMC 2 slot, we begin with some creature removal options in the form of Ram Through and Bite Down, both of which have target creature we control deal damage equal to their power to target creature we don't control, the former dealing any excess damage to that creature's controller if our creature has trample, and the latter letting us hit planeswalkers as well, both serving as one-sided fight effects that allow us to convert our creature's high power into solid spot removal. We then continue on the removal game plan as we delve deeper into this slot with Return to Nature and Wilt, both of which let us destroy target artifact or enchantment, the former alternatively giving us the option to exile a card from a graveyard, and the latter letting us cycle it for 2, this time providing us some solid back row disruption to deal with our opponent's non-creature threats that have some additional utility in the form of graveyard hate and cantripping respectively. Then closing out the CMC 2 slot, we have Rapid Vigor, which regenerates each creature we control, enabling us to protect our board against our opponent's attempts to wipe it and leaving us in a very good spot after the dust settles to crack back. We then return to the removal game plan as we enter the CMC3 slot with Beast Within and Krosan Grip, the former destroying target permanent and giving its controller a 3/3 to replace it, and the latter destroying target artifact or enchantment while having split second, giving us even more removal that either deals with a wide variety of threats or prevents our opponents from responding to it, which can go a long way to keep our game plan going without being disrupted by our opponent's plays. Then skipping again to the CMC5 slot, we come to our last instant, Return of the Wild Speaker, which lets us either draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-humans we control, or instead give all non-human creatures we control +3/+3 until end of turn. Both its modes being very useful to us by using our bigger creatures to either reload our hands or to crack in for more damage, and the fact that it can be used at instant speed to catch our opponents off guard, making it even better. That covers all our instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Opening in the CMC1 slot, we have its lone entrant, Bushwhack, which has us either search our deck for a basic land and put it into our hand, or have target creature we control fight target creature we don't control. Its land tutoring mode being very usable to help us cheaply make our land drops early, while its fight effect is useful removal once our board has been established. The CMC2 slot then brings us some ramp with its two entrants, Rampant Growth and Nature's Lore, both of which search our deck for a land and put it into play, the former being limited to basics and putting it into play tapped, while the latter's limited to forests, each providing the staple land ramp our color is known for to help us speed up our mana base and get to our bigger creatures faster. This trend then continues into the CMC3 slot with its two entrants, Cultivate and Nissa's Pilgrimage, both of which search our deck for two basic lands, putting one into play tapped and the other into our hand, the former being limited to basics and the latter being limited to basic forests and fetching an additional one to our hand if we have 2+ instants or sorceries in our graveyard, again providing even more land-based ramp to help speed up our mana base even further. We're then back to single entries as we enter the CMC4 slot with Fade from History, which has each player create a 2/2 if they control an artifact or enchantment, then destroys all artifacts and enchantments, making it a serviceable back row wipe that may hurt us by blowing out some of our payoffs, but is still well worth running as it will absolutely devastate artifact and enchantment heavy decks, and at worst will demolish our opponent's rocks to slow them down as we bear down on them with our superior creatures. And finally, reaching the last of our sorceries, we have Shamanic Revelation, which lets us draw a card for each creature we control and also has us gain 4 life for each creature we control with 4+ power, generating us a decent amount of value from our large creature base by turning it into draw and tacking on a hefty amount of life gain to help stabilize our life totals, which is some good upside to have access to depending on the decks we're up against. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Bypassing our enchantments CMC1 and 2 slots, we begin in the CMC3 slot with Garruk's Uprising and Elemental Bond, both of which draw us a card when a creature of a certain power ETBs under our control, the former doing so for 4+ power creatures in addition to letting us draw a card when it ETBs if we have a 4+ power creature in play already and granting all creatures we control trample, and the latter doing so for 3+ power creatures, each providing us with more steady card advantage as we summon the majority of our creature base, and the former's AoE trample granting being nice upside to get additional damage in with said creatures. The CMC4 slot is then up next with our second to last enchantment entry, Leyline of Abundance, which can begin the game in play if it's in our opening hand, adds an additional green mana whenever we tap a creature for mana, and lets us pay 6 and double green to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. Its additional mana generation allowing us to tap Gwenna for 3 instead of 2, as well as improving all our other mana dorks mana generation considerably for a sizable boost to our mana base, while its +1/+1 counter distribution serves as a decent mana sink to pump up established boards once we run out of creatures to cast, and that's all on top of occasionally coming into play for free, which while rare is still nice. And finally, the CMC5 slot brings us our last enchantment in the form of Unnatural Growth, which, at the beginning of each combat, doubles the power and toughness of each creature we control until the end of the turn, literally doubling our creature size on each and every combat phase, which considering the average size of our creatures as well as our easy access to trample, can easily threaten our opponents for lethal as soon as it hits the board. That covers all our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. It's the CMC1 slot leading us off as we enter our small artifact suite with its lone entry, Soul Ring, which taps for 2 colorless, which we're running to facilitate casting Gwenna on turn 2, and then using it afterwards to help cast our higher CMC creatures with the potent boost to our mana it provides. We then skip to the CMC3 slot where we have the only 2 other artifacts we'll be running, those being Lifecrafter's Bestiary and Ronus' Monument. Lifecrafter's Bestiary has a scry 1 at the beginning of our upkeep, and whenever we cast a creature spell, lets us pay a green to draw a card. The passive card selection it provides being nice to help us make our land drops or dig for creatures and or payoffs depending on what we need at the moment, while its creature-based draw will find a good home next to all the others we'll be running in this build to ensure we never run out of spells to cast. Ronus' Monument reduces the cost of all our green creature spells by 1, and whenever we cast a creature spell, grants target creature we control +2/+2 and trample until end of turn, providing both ramp and easy access to trample for our build in one simple package, both of which we can always use more of. That covers all our artifacts, and since we have no planeswalkers in this build, let's move straight to our land base. Starting off with our only mana land, we have Myriad Landscape, which comes into play tapped, taps for a colorless, and lets us pay 2, tap it and sack it to put 2 basic lands of the same type into play tapped, providing decent ramp from the land slot whose limitation doesn't really affect us at all since we're a mono-colored deck anyway. Then from there it's on to our utility lands, in which we'll be running Mosswort Bridge, Oran Reef the Vastwood, and Rogue's Passage. Mosswort Bridge has Hideaway 4, taps for a green, and lets us pay a green and tap it to play the card exiled with its Hideaway for free if we control 10+ power worth of creatures, usually allowing us to cheat out something big for relatively little cost due to our high volume of high power creatures. Oran Reef the Vastwood comes into play tapped, taps for a green, and lets us tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that ETB'd that turn, making it a cheap way to make our already enormous creatures even bigger as they come into play from the relative safety of our land slot. Rogue's Passage taps for a colorless and lets us pay 4 and tap it to make target creature unblockable until end of turn. Its ability to make one of our beatsticks completely able to bypass blockers, making it invaluable on stalled board states so we may continue getting in for damage. And lastly, we're running 32 forests as our basics to close out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 42 creatures including the commander, 8 instants, 7 sorceries, 4 enchantments, 3 artifacts, 0 planeswalkers, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 30 creatures with 5+ power, 30 cards that care about creatures, 11 cards that care about high power creatures, 9 sources of single target or AoE stat boosts, 7 sources of single target or AoE trample, and 5 cards that either de-incentivize or prevent the use of removal on our creatures, giving us a large number of high power creatures to proc Gwenna's untapping and growth effects, plenty of payoffs for the creatures themselves and those with high power, and a decent number of ways to make them even more dangerous and resilient by pumping their stats, granting them trample, and protecting them from removal. For general deck stats, we have 18 ramp sources, 12 card draw sources, 15 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes. Our ramp being much higher than normal to help us reach our commander and then our higher CMC creatures that much faster, while our removal is slightly higher than average due to a good chunk of it being tied into our creature base, with our draw and board wipes falling within more normal ratios. Then looking at our mana curve, we have 6 1-drops, 9 2-drops, 12 3-drops, 10 4-drops, 9 5-drops, 7 6-drops, 4 7-drops, 3 8-drops, 2 9-drops, 1 10-drop, and 1 12-drop, leaving us with a heavyweight curve that both our commander and ramp package will help us get through much faster than one might expect, allowing us to drop our massive beatsticks well ahead of curve and running over our opponents with them before they know what hit them. Currently, this deck is valued at exactly $65, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For side grades, Terra Stomper can be swapped out for Jugan the Rising Star if we want additional means to deal with flyers that can pump our board if it's dealt with. Moldgraph Monstrosity can be exchanged for Spearbreaker Behemoth if we favor additional onboard protection over reanimation, and for a few cents more, Archetype of Endurance can be cut in favor of Kamal Heart of Krosa in case we want access to another repeatable overrun style effect over the protection his predecessor provided. Then for upgrades, Titanoth Rex can be swapped out in favor of Apex Altasaur, who's only slightly smaller and provides some potent removal with its repeatable fight effect. Terra Stomper can be cut to make room for Primal Crux, who may be smaller initially but can grow to enormous size considering our build's high volume of multi-green pip permanents. Llanowar Tribe can be axed in favor of Rundani Behemoth Caller, who still provides reasonable ramp while making our high CMC creatures come into play with even bigger stat blocks. Challenger Troll can be benched for Silverback Elder, who provides repeatable back row removal, ramp, and life gain as we cast our creature spells. And Arashi the Sky Asunder can be let go to make room for Elder Gargaroth, who's still able to deal with flyers thanks to its reach while providing repeatable token creation, life gain, and card advantage all on a bigger stat block. And finally, we can swap out Lifecrafter's Bestiary for my old nemesis, the Great Henge, which does what it does, by which I mean everything this deck wants and needs, specifically becoming cheaper based on our creature's power, providing additional ramp and repeatable creature-based draw, with life gain thrown in for good measure. Honestly, making it a spectacular addition to the build if it wasn't nearly the price of the entire deck at the time of recording. Come on Wizards, it's been over 3 years since this card was released. I think it's time we got a reprint. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Before we continue, I'd first like to take a moment to give a big thanks to all the channel subscribers for helping us reach the 8.8k subscriber milestone. Thank you all for your continued support, as this channel would be unable to grow without it. Taking a look at the results of last week's poll, it looks like Titania was able to beat out the brothers Mishra and Urza in the polls to claim the top spot, so look forward to a land-focused build featuring her with a $100 budget coming soon. Then moving on to next week's poll, since the Commander spoilers for All Will Be One will be released on January 18th, it's time once again to tackle the precon upgrades for the set. As such, this week's winner will determine which one I'll be covering first, whether that be Corrupting Influence or Rebellion Rising. Please cast your vote in the community tab, link in the description, and let me know in the comments who you voted for and what commanders you want to see in future polls. And before we close out, again, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done so already, as this channel cannot grow without your support. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank Sahir21 yet again for another generous donation. Thanks for keeping the coffee coming, Sahir21, and thanks for supporting the channel. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.